So don't worry about that. We'll get to it. I always like having something concrete in front of us to talk about it. So that's why I did it. But sort of the lecture is broad enough कि अगर आप लोगों ने नहीं पढ़ी, किसी ने नहीं पढ़ी या किसी को नहीं समझ आई, तब भी उसके अंदर कोई इतना प्रॉब्लम नहीं होगा. Dr. Usana ने पहले कहा था कि अपना introduction करा दूं, and I said I wanted to make the introduction a part of my presentation. It's because I come from a very what do you call it, like odd kind of background, an odd kind of background in the sense that I have had the opportunity of working with various disciplinary methods. If anything, I might not be the best at a lot of things, but I know a lot of things. So it's sort of the jack of all trade that I've kind of gone down the route. But I think that is a very important position, and that I feel very strongly about that, given the current crisis, given all the sort of uncertainty in the world, sort of it is the need is for us to really question some of these disciplinary boundaries and think beyond them. And I think this entire session, इसके पीछे जो main motive है, जो मुझे भी लगता है, I mean, that is one of the central motive, is for us to get into this conversation. I wanted to maybe give you a little bit of the background through some of these slides that show some of the work that I've done. By training, I am a cultural anthropologist, लेकिन मेरा सारा काम जो है वो historical in its nature है. तो आपको leftmost के ऊपर एक तस्वीर नजर आ रही है. That's sort of a recent talk that I gave. That's from my own dissertational work, and that's now in the process of being turned into a book. And it's a historical ethnography, is how I'd like to put it. So it is history, but it takes into consideration a lot of contemporary events. It's very small scale, very like fine granular, gets into the lives of people. And so it encompasses sort of several continents. My research part of it takes place in South Asia, part in the Persian Gulf, part in Africa. लेकिन उसके साथ साथ जो ये मेरा हिस्ट्री और एंथ्रोपोलॉजी के अंदर था, फिर मुझे कुछ अपॉर्चुनिटी मिली to work in Singapore with an organization that was closely associated with their foreign ministry. So there I got to go from being an anthropologist and historian to also try to be an international relations expert, or to try to be a Middle East expert or foreign relation expert. The program on the right is something that I did during that time. And it kind of brings in a lot of the elements from history anthropology into the field of IR and trying to see this relationship between the states anew. और उसी की एक extension थी जो आपको leftmost 9/11 legacies है, which is again a more IR related project, but also with thinking about very historical theories very deeply. एक मेरे जहन में हमेशा होता है एक सवाल था कि हम लोग अक्सर पोस्ट कॉलोनियल वर्ल्ड के बारे में बात करते हैं, खासतौर पे हम लोग जो ह्यूमैनिटीज या लिबरल आर्ट में, कि जब अंग्रेज गए, जब कॉलोनियलिज्म खत्म हुई, उसके बाद भी थी दुनिया जो थी वो उनके असरात खत्म नहीं हुए और हम अभी भी उन असरात में रहते हैं. So that what this project did was that it expanded a similar framework to look at 9/11, and the argument was that the world that we live in today is deeply entrenched with things and models that came about during 9/11, even if we ourselves have gotten over, even if sort of militarily that war might be over, even if America ने छोड़ दिया है और अफगानिस्तान से इराक से निकल गए हैं, लेकिन उसके असरात अभी बाकी हैं. But now recently, as I said, लाहौर में जब से आया हूँ, लाहौर में a lot of these things started to seem a little more abstract to me, and I became involved in more concrete on the ground research project that could have very clear deliverable outcomes. And one of the things that I'm doing right now is that I've been involved in this multidisciplinary research on water usage and water quality. So we're doing surveys, we're doing qualitative analysis on how people relate to water, but at the same time testing the water quality from across Lahore. I mean, there's around like 600 locations that we're working at. That's a big project. So as you can see, I mean, I've moved from history, anthropology, IR, and now, many people would, like economics, and, if you really stretch it, some conversations, at least with biologists as well. I actually recently co-authored a piece with a biologist as well, and I co-taught a class with an economist. So, I say all of this not to, not to sort of, give you a real long lecture about myself, but to get to a very fundamental, maybe concern that we have that I want to forward in this entire presentation about how do we think across these disciplinary boundaries. But why was I doing, like people spend years being expert in this. So how do you move across this? And one of the things that I personally have found very useful in doing it is to develop a good architecture of a good architectural understanding of the disciplines, right? So getting a good systematic understanding of how the different disciplines operate, where the overlaps might be, what are the the shared fundamentals, what are the differentiating principles. So thinking across a lot of those lines in a very systematic way about our disciplinary concerns is what really it's a reason that I tell you about all of this diverse background. क्योंकि आज की प्रेजेंटेशन के अंदर भी जो मैंने सोचा था, पहले तो मैंने सोचा था कि हम किसी एक स्पेसिफिक डिसिप्लिन से शुरू करें, लेकिन क्योंकि इतने मुख्तलिफ आप कह लें एक्सपर्ट्स हमारे साथ आज शामिल हैं. आई नो देयर इज बायोलॉजिस्ट, there's economists, there's psychologists, there's computer science people. So मतलब किसी भी एक जगह से शुरू करना मेरा ख्याल है थोड़ा सा वो ज्यादती होगी, इसीलिए हम शुरू करते हैं in with a bit more broader understanding about research and about what constitutes as research and what constitutes the different disciplines. एक आप लोगों ने शायद नोटिस किया होगा कि one of the main ways in which we now differentiate between our disciplines, between our at least the research disciplines, is we say तीन चीजें हैं. एक natural science है आपके पास, एक social science है, एक humanities है, right? ये एक basic division है जो अक्सर liberal art colleges के अंदर भी होती है. इस तरह हम departments को आपस में फर्क करते हैं. तो एक सतही तौर पे तो हमें पता है कि इनके बीच में क्या फर्क है कि नेचुरल साइंस के अंदर तो आप फिजिक्स, केमिस्ट्री वगैरह पढ़ते हैं, सोशल साइंस के अंदर इकोनॉमिक्स, पॉलिटिकल साइंस, और ह्यूमैनिटीज के अंदर लैंग्वेज, रिलीजन वगैरह पढ़ते हैं. But at a more deeper level, what really differentiates between them? What are the foundational principles through which these become like three branches of organizing human knowledge? And for that, I know I've been asked to talk about epistemology, but before we get to epistemology, there's a higher level question that we need to first think about. And that is the question of ontology. Ontology, I mean, sunne mein jo hai, it sounds like a very difficult, complex world, but it's actually a very simple idea, and it's a very simple, simple in the sense, simple, but not simplistic perhaps. So it's this idea about, the ontologies is this question about what is the nature of reality. एक सबसे बुनियादी सवाल जो हम किसी भी रिसर्चर को सोचना चाहिए वो है कि मेरे नजदीक हकीकत क्या होती है? What is reality? What is the world out there? And with that, currently there's three very, like I'd say, foundational approaches to it that you see over here. Of course, these are not, exhaustive lists. और अब रिसेंटली बड़ी इंटरेस्टिंग डिबेट्स भी हुई है फिलोसफी के अंदर, फिलोसफी ऑफ साइंस के अंदर, मुख्तलिफ डिसिप्लिन्स के अंदर भी डिबेट हुई है जिसके अंदर ये काफी आइडियाज जो हैं वो चेंज हो गए हैं. बट दीज आर द थ्री, एंड बिकॉज ऑफ टाइम कंस्ट्रेंट आई वांट टू कीप इट डाउन टू दीज थ्री, कि तीन मुख्तलिफ तरीके हैं जिनके ऊपर हम सोचते हैं कि रियलिटी क्या है, व्हाट इज द वर्ल्ड आउट देयर. एक जो खास तौर पे आप सारे लोग जो मेरे ख्याल से नेचुरल साइंसेस से जो बायोलॉजिस्ट, फिजिसिस्ट हम लोगों में होंगे, उनके लिए एक बड़ा आसान हो गया समझना कि ऑब्जेक्टिव्स की एक दुनिया है जो बिल्कुल दैट इज अ वेरी रियल वर्ल्ड आउट देयर. वो मेरे समझने से, आपके समझने से उसके अंदर कोई चेंज नहीं आता. वो दुनिया जो है वो आज देखें, वो कल देखें, वो पाकिस्तान में देखें, अमेरिका में देखें, वो एक ही है. फॉर एग्जांपल the sort of the go to idea is always gravity, कि हकीकत ये है कि मैं कोई भी चीज फेंकूंगा तो वो नीचे आएगी. ये चीज जो है आज भी सच थी, ये कल भी सच थी और कल सच रहेगी भी. और ये पाकिस्तान में भी सच है, ये अमेरिका में भी सच है, ये मैं करूं तब भी सच है, ये आप करें तब भी सच है, राइट? So there is an objective reality out there and the and that and it exists independent of what we think of it, or independent what we as human beings do about it, right? So physics, chemistry, a lot of these things are very central to it, but we can maybe later go on to discussions how even physics and chemistry might be going in other directions too. Constructivist is this idea. I mean, it is somewhat between the objectivist and the subjectivist idea, but it should stand of its own. And constructivist says कि हाँ एक असलियत तो है बिल्कुल, लेकिन जो असलियत है वो सिर्फ असलियत आप कह लें एक नेचर की असलियत नहीं है. It's not about just the physics and laws of it, but it's a reality that we have ourselves built, right? तो हम जो असलियत जिस दुनिया में हम रहते हैं, वो दुनिया जो है वो एक सिर्फ नेचुरल फैक्ट्स की दुनिया नहीं है, वो एक ऐसी दुनिया है जिसको हमने इंसानों ने उसको बना दिया, लेकिन हमने भी उसे उस तरह बनाया जैसे एक नेचर थी कि इट ऑपरेट्स ऑलमोस्ट एज लॉस, it operates in fixed patterns, right? So the ideal example for this would be like something like economics के अंदर हम ये अक्सर देखते हैं, या हम जो है सॉरी या हम कि इकोनॉमिक्स के अंदर देखते हैं कि एक इकोनॉमिस्ट वुड से लुक कि आप मैं इसाकदार जो भी कहे डॉलर का रेट, एक इसाकदार को लगे कि डॉलर जो है वो 20 रुपए है, लेकिन एक कंस्ट्रक्टिविस्ट रियलिटी है कि डॉलर का रेट 250 रुपए ही होगा, या डॉलर का रेट 300 रुपए ही होगा, राइट? सो इट डजंट मैटर व्हाट आई थिंक और व्हाट यू थिंक. There is a constructive social reality. It's not, maybe it comes from nature, but it is there. But then the third position, the subjectivist position, this often जो है जब हम देखते हैं तो अक्सर इसको कैरिकेचराइज कर देते हैं. इसके बारे में एक मजाहिया तौर पे इसको प्रेजेंट किया जाता है कि नहीं कि because at one level it's a very basic fact कि how can you deny that gravity exists? How can you deny the fact that that there's certain rules of monetary theory, that money operates through certain rules? How can you deny that law exists, that nation exists, right? But subjectivism is not really saying that it doesn't exist. It says that कि उसकी हकीकत जो भी हो, लेकिन हम उसको समझ सकते हैं सिर्फ through our own mental capacities, right? So I can an apple might fall, but I can know about it only through my mental processing. जब मैं उस सेब को देखते हुए गिरते हुए देखूंगा तो मेरे जहन में बहुत सारी चीज चलेंगी और मैं अपने जहन के थ्रू ही उसको समझ पाऊंगा, right? But more important than that, subjectivists say that the important question is not how, but often the question of why, right? So जिसके अंदर जो like a lot of things like like religion, culture, philosophy, that's a lot of it is subjective, right? It's about कि हम जिस दुनिया में रहते हैं वो जस्ट एक मटेरियल दुनिया, मटेरियल चीजों की दुनिया, या इवन एक सोशल कॉन्स्ट्रक्ट्स की दुनिया नहीं है. हम एक ख्यालात की दुनिया में भी रहते हैं, या और ख्यालात, ख्वाहिशात, ये सब चीजें जो हैं असलियत को डिफाइन करने में उतनी ही जरूरी है जितनी ग्रेविटी है. या एक एंथ्रोपोलॉजी में एक बड़ा हम लोगों के there's a famous joke that goes that there's a villager, उस विलेजर के घर के ऊपर बिजली गिरती है और उसका घर जल जाता है, और वो कोर्ट में केस कर देता है अपने पड़ोसी के ऊपर. उससे कहता है कि ये पड़ोसी ने मेरे ऊपर काला जादू किया था इसलिए मेरा घर जला है. तो कोर्ट के अंदर जो है साइंटिफिक एक्सपर्ट को बुलाया जाता है. वो कहते हैं कि नहीं जी, ये ऐसे नहीं हुआ. इसका एक तरीका होता है, वो चार्जेस हवा में डेवलप होते हैं. जब चार्जेस डेवलप होते हैं तो एक नेगेटिव उसके एक पोल बनता है, एक पॉजिटिव पोल बनता है, और उसके अंदर उसे डिस्चार्ज होना होता है. और ये एक कुदरत का निजाम है, उसके जरिए हुआ है. एंड द विलेजर सेज दैट इज ऑल इज फाइन, जो आप कह रहे हैं वो बिल्कुल ठीक है, इसी वजह से होता होगा, लेकिन आप मुझे बताएं कि मेरे घर पे क्यों गिरी है, मेरे पड़ोसी के घर पे क्यों नहीं गिरी. Yeah. So, and there's no real answer to it. The answer can only come from a subjective position that उसके काला जादू किया था इसीलिए हो सकता है उसे घर पे गिरी हो. So it is these are very different ways of approaching what the real is. But that's a very abstract thing. And of course, I hope आप लोग already you've come to this somewhat of this conclusion that there is some relationship between these three different approaches and the three main branches of the research sciences that we see right now. लेकिन ये अभी एक मैंने आपको एक प्रिलिमिनरी आपके लिए एक इनिशियल आपको एक पोजीशन दिखाई है, और जैसे जैसे मेरे ख्याल से हम डिस्कशन में जाएंगे तो हम डिस्कस करेंगे कि इसको किस तरह हम और कॉम्प्लिकेट किया जा सकता है, और कैसे हाउ माइट सोशल साइंसेस बी यूजिंग सब्जेक्टिविस्ट पोजीशंस, or how might humanities be turning to objectivist reality positions as well. Lekin this is the structure of it. So the next question that comes is, okay, we know how natural sciences, social sciences, humanities comes about. लेकिन हम सब सिर्फ ये नहीं करते, हम सब तो आप कह लें एक डिफरेंट डिसिप्लिन्स के साथ जुड़े हुए हैं। कुछ हम में से फिजिक्सिस्ट हैं, कुछ हम में से केमिस्ट्री वाले हैं, कुछ हम में से हिस्टोरियंस हैं, एंथ्रोपोलॉजिस्ट हैं। तो ये इन बड़ी ब्रांचेस से हम स्पेसिफिक डिसिप्लिन्स की तरफ किस तरह पहुंचते हैं, या एक सवाल है। उस सवाल के लिए हमें एक ऑन्टोलॉजी से एक स्टेप नीचे आना होगा टूवर्ड्स एपिस्टेमोलॉजीज, या एपिस्टेमोलॉजी। और जो आज की एक आप कह लें एक तरह से आज की टॉक का टॉपिक भी जो था वो एपिस्टेमोलॉजी ही था, थ्योरीज ऑफ एपिस्टेमोलॉजी। सो while ontology is interested in the question of what is reality, हकीकत क्या है, epistemology is the question about how do we understand that reality. हम उस हकीकत को समझ किस तरह सकते हैं, हम उस हकीकत को कैप्चर किस तरह कर सकते हैं, how do we organize our understanding of this reality in some kind of systematic ways of knowing so that we may even eventually lead to disciplines. Yeah, कि वो एक तो एक abstract idea of what is reality, but this is a more concrete idea about what are the systems through which we can, and through systems of knowledge through we come to understand these different ontological positions. और इन दोनों का बहुत आपस में एक गहरा ताल्लुक है, जैसे जैसे हम आगे बढ़ेंगे उसके बारे में भी हम बातचीत करते रहेंगे। अगर हम कहें कि तीन मेन जो हमने कहा, ये तीन मेन ontological approaches हैं, objectivist, constructivist, subjectivist. लेकिन epistemologies के अंदर I would right now present these 5 main epistemological positions. Again, ये बिल्कुल भी एक आप कह लें एक इख्तितामी लिस्ट नहीं है, इसके ऊपर बहस की जा सकती है और करनी चाहिए, लेकिन ये एक मेन 5 position है epistemological that I want to discuss कि आज की हम टॉक के अंदर जिनको हम डिटेल में डिस्कस करना चाहेंगे। सबसे पहले अगर हम शुरू करें एक रैशनलिज्म और रियलिज्म के साथ, yeah. So rationalism, and you can automatically see why this would be closer to some ontological positions more than the other, even if they don't fit in neatly within it. So of course we can say that objectivist position से एक rationalist और एक rationalism, rationalist या realist epistemology निकलती है। और ये rationalist या realistic epistemology क्या कहती है? ये कहती है कि हकीकत को समझने के लिए सबसे जरूरी है some kind of logic or some kind of understanding of laws through which the objective reality exists. Yeah, physics के हमें सारे कवानीन पढ़ने होंगे to understand असलियत किस तरह होती है. We need to understand how bonds are made in order to understand how chemicals came to be, how life came to be. Yeah. So rationalism and realism says that it's a very logic-based approach. It's an inductive reasoning approach. It's a theory-based approach. It says कि हमारा काम as scientist जो है वो सबसे पहला काम है कि हमने theories develop करनी है, उन theories को हमने अपने internal reasoning and logic के through उसको उनके through process करना है, उनको develop करना है, and then we take it to the field to test if it's true or not, right? Like a physicist would do a complex modeling, and then they would do a small experiment to see if that model works or not. So it's not like they're completely anti-empirical, but empiricism is the second step. Empiricism is a later step. Main thing is आपकी theory. इसका सबसे the sort of and a lot of this you people might be affair with because they कुछ basic चीजें भी हैं इसके अंदर, जो एक Descartes the French philosopher had this very famous theory. I mean, this is I think therefore I am. you may be able to recognize that. And I think, therefore, I am is a classical explanation of a rationalist epistemology, which says that, the first thing that one ought to know is that, that you exist. And the way you know it is by reasoning your own thought in itself, right? तो अपने ख्यालात अपने आप से डायलॉग के थ्रू आप किसी किस्म की हकीकत के तरफ पहुंच सकते हैं. You can capture it, you can understand it, you can transcribe it, you can write it down, you can share it with others. That's the rationalist approach. I mean, yeah, actually, I mean, it seems like it's very natural science, but even in social sciences and to some degrees, even humanities, we see it. I think सबसे clearly political science के अंदर एक जैसे realism नजर आती है. उसके अंदर है कि nation states exist regardless, right? So political scientists would do a lot of work in understanding theoretically how nation state works. And then they would integrate, bring in some examples from different countries to see, कि उनकी जो modeling है वो ठीक है कि नहीं है. Yeah, this is a model first, theory heavy, internal logic, reasoning, inductive reasoning approach. And it's very common in humanity, in natural sciences and social sciences. The next approach is positive and empiricism. Which deviates from, it's almost a reverse of the rationalist approach. While, despite the fact that both the rationalist approach and the positive approach, ये दोनों ontologically एक ही position से निकले हैं. Ontologically दोनों की ये position है कि एक objective reality exist करती है. रैशनलिस्ट कहते हैं कि वो ऑब्जेक्टिव रियलिटी एग्जिस्ट करती है, लेकिन हमको उसको समझने के लिए उनके कवानीन को समझना चाहिए. लेकिन एम्पिरिसिस्ट कहते हैं कि नहीं, कवानीन तो आप समझ लेंगे और बाद में हम समझ लेंगे. सबसे पहली चीज जो हमें समझनी चाहिए वो है कि असल में दुनिया है क्या. And let's say that the main faculty through which research should happen is not first our mind, but is our eyes, it's our ears, it's our even our tongues. So it's our senses, it's our sensorial, it's a very sensorial, what do you call it, epistemological position. कि जब तक आप खुद as an unbiased researcher जाके चीजें देखेंगे नहीं, करेंगे नहीं, आप नोट नहीं करेंगे, तब तक आपको जो है असलियत के बारे में नहीं पता चलेगा. कि अगर मैं जो हूँ समझना चाह रहा हूँ कि पानी से क्या बीमारियां होती हैं, तो मैं सिर्फ उसको एक माइक्रोस्कोप के अंदर रख के पानी को नहीं पढ़ सकता. मुझे जाना पड़ेगा, लोगों में जाके सर्वे करने पड़ेंगे, मुझे लोगों से जाके बात करने पड़ेंगे, उनके ब्लड टेस्ट करवाने पड़ेंगे, पानी के सैंपल के टेस्ट करवाने पड़ेंगे, और तभी जाके मैं एक कोई आइडिया बना सकता हूँ कि पानी गंदा है कि नहीं है. I cannot determine that just by sitting in a lab or even theoretical modeling or even by just looking at a microscope. So you need to be out there in the world. It's a very empirical heavy approach. It's a very, as I said, senses heavy approach. And one thing that positivists, as I said, the reason that positivist is still within I'd say the objectivist ontology is इनको भी positivist भी कहते हैं कि the world there is a certain order to the world. दुनिया बिल्कुल ही random नहीं चलती, लेकिन उसके कवानीन को पढ़ने के लिए हमें बिल्कुल बेसिक से शुरू करना पड़ेगा. So positivism is that कि आपने बहुत सारा डेटा कलेक्ट करना है, उनको साथ जोड़ना है और उनके बीच में पैटर्न्स बनाने हैं, और उनको पैटर्न बना के फिर आपने एक थ्योरेटिकल मॉडल बनाना है, राइट? तो बिल्कुल उल्टा जो हम इससे पहले बात करते हैं, बिल्कुल उसका एक ऑपोजिट चल रही है. The famous person that I wanted to maybe discuss in it is Durkheim, and Durkheim is a very famous sociologist who says that if I want to he studied how human societies exist, and he studied it by looking at these multiple tribes, unke saath raha, unke saath very detailed information ki, but eventually he took all that detail later on and went and created diagrams, created models, and so on and so forth. So Durkheim was convinced कि जिस तरह जो more closer to construct that जो असलियत है, that social facts are just as true as something like gravity. लेकिन इस बात के साथ सब लोग अग्री नहीं करते. एक और जो बड़ी इंपॉर्टेंट पोजीशन है जिसके ऊपर हमें अब आना चाहिए, इस And this, grew up, this is around the early 20th century, um, from Karl Marx. और आप लोग काफी familiar होंगे, कार्ल मार्क्स की जो थी एम्पेरिसिज्म से एक बेसिक जो इख्तलाफ हो ये था, उसका बेसिक इख्तलाफ एम्पेरिसिज्म से ये था कि वो कहता था कि हम अपनी साइट्स को, वी एक्चुअली कैन नॉट ट्रस्ट आवर ओन सेंसेस। इसे इसके जो मुझे नजर आ रहा है, जो मुझे सुनाई दे रहा है, वो जरूरी नहीं है कि वो ही हकीकत हो। बल्कि मार्क्स कहता था कि हमारे सेंसेस जो हैं वो एक कैमरा ऑब्सक्यूरा की तरह काम करते हैं। कैमरा ऑब्सक्यूरा, आई डोंट नो, अगर आप लोग को ये जो फिजिक्स में होंगे, हमने बचपन में एक पिन होल कैमरास बनाते थे। ये पिन होल कैमरास के अंदर होता था कि जो बाहर वाली इमेज थी वो अंदर उल्टी नजर आती थी। तो मार्क्स भी कहता है कि हमारी सेंसेस भी कुछ इसी तरह की हैं कि बिकॉज वी आर नॉट सीइंग थिंग्स डायरेक्टली, whatever we see, whatever we hear, we process through something called ideology. And he says ideology always shows us things upside down. Yeah, it shows us things, it shows us कि idea, कि ideology कहती है कि दुनिया के अंदर जो तारीख जो चली है, it's a history of ideas. But Marx says no, actually, we think that it is a history of ideas के पहले, but what really drives history forward, what really drives reality forward, is actually material relationships. Yeah. And he says and it is material relationships and it's power dynamics. कि कि असलियत जो है, मार्क्स कहता था कि अगर हमें उसे समझनी है तो हमें उसे समझने के लिए जो हम एम्पिरिकल डेटा है उसको एक करेक्टिव लेंस के थ्रू भी देखना पड़ेगा। We cannot just write what we see, what we hear directly. We have to be critical, we have to be analytical about it. And Marx calls this method the dialectical method. And this is a dialectical method for, if anybody's more familiar with theory, it comes from the German philosopher Hegel. And Hegel basically says that, the history of, the movement of history is determined by primarily by ideas. वो कहता था आइडिया से मटेरियल चेंज होता है, फिर मटेरियल चेंज से आइडियाज होता है, लेकिन in the first instance it is always ideas. And he says it is ideas that ultimately, even if ideas and materials have a concrete relationship, it's always ideas that have the upper hand. But Marx flips it around. Marx says it's always the material conditions that have the upper hand, right? So Marx would say, that whatever research that you're producing, agar aap jo hain, for example, if you are seeing, agar hum British colonial files पढ़ रहे हैं, तो उन फाइल्स के अंदर जो भी लिखा हुआ है कि अगर वो कहते हैं कि फॉर एग्जांपल इट सेज मुसलमान जो थे वो चोर थे, yeah, for example, if a colonial record says it, Marx would say you cannot read that directly. He would say that because it is obscured by ideology. And he says what we need to do is we need to think about why. We need to do a dialectic method where we ask this question about how this position came about, why, who is saying it, why are they saying it, what are the other ideas that they're building out of, right? So he says only through dialectical method, only to realizing कि okay, power relationship उस वक्त क्या थी, उस वक्त क्या ताल्लुकात थे, किस वजह से कर रहे थे, कि हम उन सब चीजों को समझने के बाद ही हम किसी असली हद के ऊपर पहुंच सकते हैं. And this quote that I want to give, it's a very popular Marx quote. It's a very iconic and representative quote. It says that, we don't really make our history of our own, but we do it under circumstances, and those circumstances are given by our material conditions. And this is a very important, empirical position that kind of deviates from the other one, but still brings a lot from these other elements. And the interesting thing जो इसके बारे में सोचने की है कि ये एक तरह से आप कह लें ontologically it is kind of in between different positions, because at some sense it's saying that there is it is constructivist for sure, but at the same time it is also very subjectivist in that sense, like it gives a lot of room for ideology, lots of room for something like culture. But those things become very clear with our third approach called the interpretive or the culturalist approach. The interpretive and the culturalist approach that says that देखें कि असलियत जो होती है वो it differs from, it's a very subjectivist position, of course, um, but it goes a little, it subjectivism was of course the ontological position, the nature of reality, लेकिन उसको capture करने के लिए interpretivist and the culturalist says कि अगर आपने असलियत capture करनी है तो आप सिर्फ लोगों को सुन नहीं रहे, सिर्फ आप उनको देख नहीं रहे, लेकिन आप देखना चाहते हैं कि वो किस कॉन्टेक्स्ट में वो बात कर रहे हैं. Yeah, the very famous example of it, I mean, Clifford Geertz, who I have written below, he has this very famous article called The Wink and the Nod. He says कि अगर कोई आपको अगर कोई सर हिलाता है, आप कोई बात करें और सामने वाला बंदा सर हिलाता है, तो उसका क्या मतलब है? वो interpretive and cultural says that you cannot really determine उसका क्या मतलब है एकदम से, क्योंकि अगर साउथ इंडिया में हो रहा है वहां पे अलग मतलब है, वहां तो लोग यस के लिए भी सर हिलाते हैं. और कि अगर कि आपकी किसी दो लोगों की लड़ाई हो रही है और लड़ाई करने में अगर कोई सर हिला रहा है तो उसका मतलब है कि कुछ और मतलब है कि बड़ा गुस्से में हिला रहा है, लेकिन अगर कोई दो दोस्त कर रहे हैं, वो कर रहे हैं, तो उसका कुछ अलग मतलब है, right? So he says that that even he says that the like unlike Marx, where Marx says, in order to, move beyond empiricism, you look at material condition. Interpretivist and culturalist says that, that more than material condition, what you're looking at is the relationship between people. लोगों के आपस में ताल्लुकात क्या होते हैं? Yeah. So it's a very relational science. And it is it is very much important about the question of, just I said, the example that I gave earlier about कि मेरे घर क्यों जला, मेरे पड़ोसी का घर क्यों नहीं चला, बिजली गिरने वाला ना, वो इसी के अंदर, that's a very interpretivist approach, that's a very culturalist approach of to understanding things. The question of not how, but question of why. um, uh, and This approach leads us into all sorts of very different kinds of like जो खास तौर पे humanities की disciplines हैं, वो इस approach को बहुत 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 ज़्यादा use करते हैं. I want to maybe just briefly also touch on Weber, because Weber connects us back to also Marx, if somebody who's familiar with it. But Weber and Marx Weber was very closely conversation with Marx. And he says Marx is right in saying, in understanding, this development of capitalism, this relationship of economics as the core of our modern society. But he says that core of our modern society is not comes because जो मार्क्स है एक आइडिया है ना कि पहले प्रिमिटिव सोसाइटी में ये होता था, फिर इसमें ये होता था, फिर इसमें ये होता था, and it's sort of a material relation that leads us to it. He says not just this kind of determinist material relation, but he says actually जो कैपिटलिज्म की शक्ल ये निकली है, इसका बहुत गहरा ताल्लुक है हमारा रिलीजन के साथ, हमारे कल्चर के साथ. And he looks at development of capitalism in the US, and he says the shape that it comes in the US is because of Protestantism. And he's very interested in this. He says कि capitalism जो है उसकी theory कहती है कि आप it's a spending theory. But he says American capitalism often, at its early stage was about saving capitalism. And he says Protestantism was about saving culture. So, and he says only when you have savings, then can you have spending. So he says that, look, कि हम जो भी करते हैं वो सिर्फ एक आप कह लें एक मटीरियल या एक आप कह लें like these kind of very interested individuals की तरह नहीं करते, but हमारे एक higher loss भी होते हैं, हमारे कुछ we have these abstract goals and aspirations, to be happy, to be thinking people, a lot of those things. And he says to be believing people. Religion is a very foundation of our reality in many ways. And people like this interpretivist and culturalist approach leave space for us to integrate a lot of those elements into our discussion as well. The last approach that I want to, get at, and I know आप, देखिए मैं काफी देर से बोल रहा हूँ और आप लोगों को बड़ा मौका भी दूंगा, तो हम अब एंड की तरफ ही जा रहे हैं, एंड वी विल हैव सम क्वेश्चंस एंड सवाल जवाब के बाद मेरे ख्याल से फिर हम जो रीडिंग है उसकी तरफ भी आ सकते हैं कि हम उस रीडिंग को इन सारे फ्रेमवर्क की नजर में किस तरह देखते हैं। लेकिन उससे पहले आपको मैं ये आखिरी एक, just bear with me, I want to go get you through this very last epistemological approach called the deconstructivist and the post-structuralist. The deconstructivist and post-structuralist is a very important approach in that sense because it is in many ways an anti-epistemological approach. An anti-epistemological approach in that sense that it says that कि जब भी आप एक सिस्टमैटिक आप कह लें सिस्टमैटिक वे ऑफ ऑर्गेनाइजिंग नॉलेज कंस्ट्रक्ट करेंगे, डिकंस्ट्रक्ट कहते हैं कि वो बाय इट्स वेरी नेचर असलियत से दूर होगा, क्योंकि असलियत हकीकत जो है उसके अंदर रैंडमनेस बहुत ज्यादा है, उसके अंदर कंटिंजेंसी बहुत ज्यादा है, उसके अंदर आर्बिट्रीनेस बहुत ज्यादा है, उसके अंदर सब्जेक्टिविटी बहुत ज्यादा है। या सो इसे हम डे टू डे जिंदगी में आज मैं सोता रहा हूँ पूरे दिन, तो हो सकता है मैं सोता रहा हूँ पूरे दिन, उसमें आप क्या सो दैट्स एन आर्बिट्री डिसीजन, दैट्स अ डिसीजन दैट आई चोज टू come here and present. I could have just slept. Of course, Marx would disagree. Marx would say, no, it's not about that. It's about this material condition. You work and, your job is tied to, so, or tied to that, if we, some of the interpretive people would say, no, it's about, this culture, I came here and presented instead of sleeping because of the fact that, that there was relationships, like social commitments and logon ke saath, or, you wanted to form bonds. That's why you came. So there's different approaches. As I said, the same thing can be approached differently, but what the deconstructivist and post-structuralists say, कि आप जैसे ही किसी भी सिस्टम ऑफ नॉलेज को आप कॉन्क्रेटाइज करना शुरू करेंगे, आप असलियत से दूर जाते चले जाएंगे, क्योंकि असलियत जो है वो हमेशा it's only in the change. So what they say is what we can only understand, the only knowledge that we can formulate is knowledge about processes, knowledge about actions. We can only look at things in a slice of time at a certain point in time. Yeah. So your post-structuralist position, I mean, becomes very common with people like, there's a lot of like people like Derrida, Deleuze, literature के अंदर बहुत ज़्यादा common हो गई है, sometimes in philosophy, even in anthropology. And we can, get more examples of what deconstructivist thing is. I mean, because now the deconstructivist position, what they're actually, an emerging position within the school of thought is that it is saying that जो asliyat itself, reality itself, it's not that, that people have different belief structures, but it's that there are different realities in themselves. Yeah. So this new approach that says that, कि अगर मैं कहूँ कि जो घर जला था वो काले जादू के ऊपर जला था, और काला जादू जो है एक बिलीफ सिस्टम है, या that's the interpretive system. Interpretive system would say that, black magic is a belief system. Deconstructivist or post-structuralist say, no, it's not just a belief system, but it's an alternate reality in itself. Yeah. So it goes a level higher to change basically our ontological position as well. So, and it is a very interesting position because, the fact that, you can have, the ontological reality can change itself. अब खास तौर पे हम अब जब क्लाइमेट चेंज की दुनिया में रहते हैं, जिसके अंदर असल में हमारी आप कह लें लॉज ऑफ फिजिक्स चेंज हो रहे हैं, लॉज ऑफ केमिस्ट्री चेंज हो रहे हैं, लॉज ऑफ बायोलॉजी चेंज हो रहे हैं। सो एक बड़ी इंटरेस्टिंग डिबेट इसके अंदर खड़ी होती है पोस्ट स्ट्रक्चरलिस्ट के साथ with sort of, questions about ontology. The reason that I give you all of this is I want to give you, this a more zoomed out picture. This is a zoomed out picture of what I would say is, the basics or the fundamental of research. कि हम आप चाहे जिस भी डिसिप्लिन के अंदर हो, ये एक बुनियादी सवाल हैं जो आप लोगों को everybody I think should ask themselves. And the question starts with ontology. What is reality? Are you an objectivist? Are you a constructivist? Are you a subjectivist? Then once you say, okay, I know this is my fundamental idea of what reality is, then you get to the question of epistemology, कि हम उस असलियत को किस तरह समझ सकते हैं? How can we capture that reality? And then I'll give you these 5 different epistemological frameworks to understand this. And उन सब के अंदर जो है different theoretical, so the people that I was mentioning, Marxist perspective, Weberian perspective, Durkheimian perspective, those are theoretical perspectives within epistemologies. Yeah. Or on theoretical perspective, then you eventually have to get to the question of methodology and methods. And this is something I think जो आगे चल के हमारे lectures होंगे इस series के अंदर, they're mainly, from what I understand, are mainly about this question about methodology and methods. Yeah, कि हमने एक decide कर लिया कि हकीकत ये है, उस हकीकत को हम इस तरह समझ सकते हैं, लेकिन मैं खुद जो हूँ इसको actually capture करने के लिए ये करूँगा, right? This is the conceptual approach that I would take, which is the theory. And this is the very direct, empirical approach, or, maybe non-empirical approach that I take, the methods that I use to capture that data or the sources of data. ये एक basic architecture of knowledge है. लेकिन ये मैं इसलिए बार बार कह रहा हूँ कि ये एक बेसिक आर्किटेक्चर ऑफ नॉलेज है, क्योंकि हमारा गोल सिर्फ ये नहीं होना चाहिए कि हम अपने आप को हम फिगर आउट करें कि भाई मैं किस बॉक्स में फिट करता हूँ, कि भाई मैं ये हूँ, कि मैं ये हूँ, कि मैं ये हूँ. एक इतनी नीट चीजें बनाने की जरूरत नहीं है कोई. Actually what is needed is, at least to me, is this very dialectical approach, is to say, okay, if this is my methods, what does my method say about these bigger questions about epistemology? What does my epistemological research say about, bigger questions about ontology? So eventually what, our ideal goal should be कि हम जो ये नीट बाउंड्रीज बनाई हैं, जो हमने एक स्कीमा बनाया है, इसको हम पुश बैक करें, इसको हम डिस्टर्ब करें, हम नई अप्रोचेस लेके आए, जो अप्रोचेस ये मुख्तलिफ एपिस्टेमोलॉजीज मिलाती हैं, जो एपिस्टेमोलॉजीज मिला के ontological सवालात पूछती हैं, right? So we think of new methodologies that can do a lot of this. That, I think, is the challenge in front of us. And that is, I think, if anything that you want to take out of this talk, that is what you need to take out of this talk, is this commitment to chat, to not just do हम जो अपनी whatever the small thing that we're doing. I mean, हम जो भी research कर रहे हैं, कि हम एक, जैसे मैं एक specific चीज के ऊपर करता हूँ, मैं कहता हूँ कि भाई मैं इस गांव को इस वक्त से इस वक्त के बीच में मेरी स्टडी इस चीज के ऊपर है. लेकिन सिर्फ मेरी वो स्टडी नहीं हो सकती. मेरी स्टडी का मकसद जो है, ये ब्रॉडर आर्किटेक्चर ऑफ नॉलेज जो है, ब्रॉडर हमारी जो आप कह लें एक सिस्टम ऑफ साइंस, जो एकेडमिक एक स्ट्रक्चर जो है, उसको पुश बैक करना, उसको कंट्रीब्यूट करना भी होना चाहिए और लाजमी होना चाहिए. और ये बहुत जरूरी है, और इस बात को हम अक्सर भूल जाते हैं, क्योंकि for some reason those of us in the global south, हम बड़े कन्विंस्ड है कि हम सिर्फ कंज्यूमर्स ऑफ नॉलेज हैं, कि हम जो हैं वो, और at max apply, we can apply knowledge, we can consume knowledge, but we don't really produce knowledge. Knowledge is produced by somebody out there, and we're sort of always looking for people out there, people in the West, कि वो क्या कर रहे हैं और हमारा काम उनसे करीब करीब हो. Lekin, the need of the hour is that we need to push that perspective. And actually, Pakistan is such an interesting country in so many ways, because it destabilizes a lot of our fundamental understandings of a lot of things. So which gives us a unique opportunity to ask those basic questions. Yeah, to think about research more deeply, research as almost a calling in itself. Yeah, हमारा एक मकसद है, that to do research, and through research to ask these more fundamental questions. And it may even be, that what Marx says, that, the goal shouldn't just be to understand reality, but also to change it, to also transform it. So with that, I want to end my lecture today. I want to get some questions, and then maybe we can get into the reading. All right. Thank you,
Hello.
everyone. I mean, if I could get some questions.
Thank you so much, sir. I'll quickly request all the participants to please type their questions in the chat box, and I will open the Zoom polling as well. I'll launch it. You're requested to please respond to that. So, Dr. Saab, thank you so much for an amazing lecture. And I'll go through the comments and the questions which we got at around 1:22. So Mr. Mohammed Saleh asked that is idealism then a subjectivist idea because idealism is thought of in the human mind.
आई थिंक बिल्कुल ठीक आप नतीजे पे पहुंचे हैं कि आइडियलिस्ट जो जो ये इंटरप्रेटिव थ्योरी या आइडियलिस्ट थ्योरीज they are very subjective positions, but as I said, some philosophers may even push back and that says, look, खास तौर पे जिस तरह आप कह लेना कि एक theoretical perspective जो अब develop हो रहा है जिसे हम कहते हैं the anthropological turn, anthropology में actually बहुत prominent है, the ontological turn, this idea of Anthropocene. And this idea is that because of ideas, certain human ideas such as capitalism and capitalist ideas in specific that says that that we as human, our goal should be to exploit nature in order to produce profits. And the theory says that because of this very ideational framework, हमने दुनिया के ऊपर एक मखसूस तरीके से हम रहे, जिसके अंदर हमने फैक्ट्रियां बनाई, हमने तेल निकाला, हमने एक रोडें बनाई, all the environmental damage that happened, जिन सब चीजों की वजह से दुनिया के अंदर कुछ बुनियादी तब्दीलियां भी आने लगी. So objective conditions started to change because of this idealist position about what capitalists should be, what capitalism, what are as how we should behave in this world. And uski wajah se now even the objective reality is changing. अब जून के अंदर जो है आपके ओलाबारी हो रही है मुल्तान के अंदर, right? So to say that it is because of this idea of capitalism is not too wrong, it's not too off, but it also shows how an idea can actually bring about change in material objective conditions as well.
Thank you, sir. Moving on, we have a comment from Hafiz Rukhsar, that excellent explanation and elaboration of philosophical theories. Previously, these theories are very difficult to understand. So this is a comment. And then we have a comment from Mr. Rizwanullah explaining the very important concepts by using very easy daily life examples. So this is a comment. And then we have what is the Hafiz Rukhsar is also asking that what is the difference between research method and tool? Either they are same, are different from each other.
ये अच्छा सवाल है. अब ये जो हूं ना, मैं आपको मेरे ख्याल से दो डिफरेंट एग्जांपल से देता हूँ. एंड ऑफ कोर्स आगे चल के जो लेक्चर्स होंगे वो अक्सर लेक्चर्स इन्हीं के बारे में. सो मैं एक ब्रीफ ओवरव्यू आप लोगों को अगर थोड़ी सी दे दूं कि जैसे कह लें कि अगर मैं कहूँ कि आई वांट टू, मैं अभी रिसेंटली पढ़ना चाह रहा था कि आई वांटेड टू अंडरस्टैंड कि पाकिस्तान के अंदर एक चेंज आया है कि अब स्कूलों के अंदर या यूनिवर्सिटियों के अंदर लड़कियां ज्यादा हैं लड़कों से. तो पाकिस्तान में लड़कियां क्यों ज्यादा पढ़ रही हैं लड़कों से? And I said I wanted to do an empirical methodology to it, which says that that I will go, I will interact with people, I will engage with people. लेकिन ये मेरी एक ethnography is just my methodological position. उसके अंदर मेरे specific tools हो सकते हैं. मेरे specific tools, ethnographic tools इस तरह हो सकते हैं कि मैं कहूँ कि भाई एक मेरा ये tool होगा कि मैं जो हूँ लोगों से कहूंगा कि आप मुझे वॉइस नोट्स भेजें, या कि मैं कुछ जो स्टूडेंट्स हैं उनसे कहूंगा कि आप मुझे अपने वॉइस नोट्स भेजें जिसमें आप मुझे समझाएं, राइट। या मैं कहूँगा एक मेरा टूल हो सकता है कि मैं स्कूलों में जाके जो हूँ क्लासरूम लेक्चर्स ऑब्जर्व करूंगा, या मैं लोग जब कॉफी शॉप पे टीनेजर्स बैठते हैं तो उनके साथ बैठूंगा, या so I'm using different tools even though methodologically it is still ethnography. Yeah, so it's just basic like different levels of abstraction basically. और आगे चल के मेरे ख्याल से जब हम जाएंगे तो in different like in the next few lectures you'll understand it better. Qualitative, quantitative, I think that's a very basic division of different methodologies, and then within that different branches, so on.
Next, we have a comment from Dr. Nashina. Thank you, Dr. Ameen, and the organizers. Thank you. Mr. Rizwanullah is asking, can you please tell me that how much tools is slash are important or dependent in this process?
Tools जो हैं वो I mean, I guess depend करता है कि आपकी क्या methodological approach है, या आपकी even what is your ontological approach. So for example, if you are an objectivist and within that objectivist you are a realist, then the only real tools that you use are your mind in itself. Inductive reasoning तो उसमें तो इतनी जरूरी नहीं है, लेकिन अगर मैं जो हूँ, for example, if I say that I am a positivist, and as a positivist I am going to do quantitative research, and within the quantitative research I'm going to do survey, then the survey tool becomes very important. Then I have to spend a lot of time in figuring out how to really make my tool precise. How do I get it to measure जो मैं उसको measure करवाना चाह रहा हूँ, how is it unbiased, and so on and so forth. So in that it becomes very important. लेकिन फिर जैसे ethnography होती है, ethnography के अंदर tool जो है ना, एक बड़ा interesting चीज है कि उसमें क्या tool होता है. अगर as in survey के अंदर as a quantitative research, if I say my survey is my instrument, it's my tool. What is my instrument? What is my tool as an ethnographer? So you yourself are an ethnographer, but it is not the same way as it would be for a realist where your mind is. So you yourself are, for an ethnographer, you'd say, I am a tool who is not just observing things, but it's also acting on the world itself. मैं जो भी करूंगा रिसर्च से उससे दुनिया तब्दील होगी. मैं अगर स्कूल में अगर मैं किसी क्लासरूम में बैठा हुआ हूँगा तो वो बच्चे जो हैं जिस तरह आमतौर पे एक्ट करते हैं वैसे एक्ट नहीं करेंगे. तो मुझे अपनी रिसर्च के अंदर उसको इस पर्सपेक्टिव्स को इंटीग्रेट करना होगा कि मेरी वजह से क्या फर्क पड़ा, मैं कौन हूं. अगर मैं, और इसके अंदर भी ये इंडिविजुअल पर्सपेक्टिव बहुत मैटर कि अगर मैं इफ आई एम एन इन 80-year-old मैन और मैं क्लास में बैठता हूं तो बच्चे जो हैं वो डिफरेंटली बिहेव करेंगे. इफ आई एम 19-year-old woman, then they would act differently. So not only is my presence changing thing, but who I am changes how they react as well. मैं कुर्ता शलवार पहनता हूँ, मैं पैंट शर्ट पहनता हूँ, all those things would impact the behavior in class as well. So the tool in that becomes important too, but in different ways. But yeah, thank you for the question.
Thank you, sir. So next we have a PhD scholar, Ms. Amna Gul, and she's asking that are all researchers clearly situated in one single epistemology? Example, can a research project only be interpretive or deconstructivist as well?
नहीं, बिल्कुल बिल्कुल आप दोनों में हो सकते हैं. और जैसे ही मैंने कहा अगर मैंने तो किसी वजह से अपनी जिंदगी का मकसद बनाया हुआ है इनको के to experiment with all these different things. So definitely I think you can be moved between them, and as I said, the goal actually should be to rethink these boundaries completely. Yeah, to not take this for assumed for granted. लेकिन आपने किसी भी चीज को अगर चैलेंज करना है, किसी चीज को भी आपने पुश बैक करना है, उसका फर्स्ट स्टेप होना चाहिए कि आपको समझना चाहिए. So you understand it, understand what these different things do, and then within that understanding start questioning them. Start questioning them कि इसकी क्या लिमिटेशन है. अच्छा, इसकी ये लिमिटेशन है, उसमें से कुछ एलिमेंट्स अगर इसके लेके आ जाऊं तो क्या उस लिमिटेशंस को उससे फर्क पड़ता है. Those kind of questions is then what you need to think about more concretely. कोई pre-made package तो आपको मिलेगा नहीं, और खासतौर पे अब जो with AI and so on, कि अगर तो हम pre-made package के ऊपर करने ना, give me a research that is ontologically okay, ontologically objectivist and rationalist, एंड उसके अंदर ये मेथड हो, उसके अंदर ये आप मेथडोलॉजी हो, उसके अंदर ये सोर्स हो, ये तो आप एक पूरा फॉर्मूला बना के आप एआई के अंदर भी डाल सकते हैं और वो भी आपको करके दे सकती है। लेकिन अगर हमें एक कदम आगे रहना है तो हमें इन फंडामेंटल्स के ऊपर ज्यादा सोचना पड़ेगा, right? So that is why I brought these up, not to to not that you guys will कि आप अपने आप को एक बॉक्स में फिगर आउट कर लें कि मैं इधर इस कैंप के अंदर हूँ, लेकिन इन फंडामेंटल्स के बारे में हम सब सोचें इनके बारे में थोड़ा मोर डीपली।
Next, we have a question regarding AI. Does AI has some role in archaeological anthropology? Dr. Huma Jawad is asking about this.
ये बड़ा अच्छा सवाल पूछा और ये मेरा आजकल बड़ा एक पसंदीदा सवाल भी है, क्योंकि मैं इस चीज के बारे में काफी सोच भी रहा हूँ और काफी काम भी कर रहा हूँ। क्योंकि जिस तरह मैंने अभी पिछली एग्जांपल भी थी कि आई मीन एआई इज अ वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग एंड वेरी यूजफुल टूल, and at first instant you would see that it may not have a lot of connection with something like ethnography, क्योंकि वो तो ये नहीं बता सकता ना कि एआई के अगर किसी ने सर हिलाया है तो क्या उसने सर जो है गुस्से में हिलाया है, उसने एक्सेप्टेंस के अंदर हिलाया है, उसने फ्लर्टिंग के अंदर हिलाया है। सो आई मीन यू कैन नॉट टेल, द एआई कैन नॉट टेल दोस डिफरेंसेस, so you need the ethnographer to get that. And but at the same time there may be certain things that the AI could be doing as well. For example, मैं maybe not example, but I said मैं अपने students को एक जो चीज अक्सर वहां पे बताता हूँ, I said use AI, but only use it to organize things that you already know. Never imagine AI as a producer of knowledge. एआई जो है कोई नई नॉलेज प्रोड्यूस नहीं कर सकता, वो सिर्फ रिगर्जुरेट करता है, उसको सिर्फ एंड इट डज इट लाइक फैंटास्टिकली, राइट, बट इट डजंट प्रोड्यूस नॉलेज। सो अगर हमने एक स्टेप आगे रहना है एज रिसर्चर्स, तो हमें अपने आप को वी रियली नीड टू टेक दिस टू हार्ट दैट हम प्रोड्यूसर्स ऑफ नॉलेज हैं और एआई नहीं है। सो you can we still use AI for organizing ideas, for detecting patterns that you may not be able to see yourself, for as a writing assistant in itself. लेकिन उसके अंदर जो इंटरप्रिटेशंस वाली बात थी, उसके अंदर जो है लोगों के ख्यालात वाली बात थी, उसमें यूज नहीं करें, स्पेशली नेवर यूज इट फॉर using it for getting quotes or getting citations and so on. I mean that's just it can't do that, not at this, it can't do that. So ये एक basic question है, लेकिन I think a lot of this this is speculative stuff. AI किस direction में जाता है वो आगे चल के ही पता चलेगा, क्योंकि एक one of the reasons is that most of the early training that is being done on things that are more commercially viable. So it's done on economics, it's done on a lot of medicine, law, and so on. So AI really hasn't been trained a lot on humanities data. It hasn't really been trained so much on anthropological data, maybe just because it doesn't have that same kind of it's a very material reading, but doesn't have the same kind of monetary outcomes as a result positively. So आई थिंक बड़ी इंटरेस्टिंग हो सकता है कि अगर कोई सीरियसली ले, एक बड़ा मैं जिस प्रोजेक्ट के बारे में सोचता हूँ कि इंशाल्लाह अनकरीब में शुरू करूंगा, is like training AI on data sets of Pakistani newspapers. Yeah. So what if you feed an AI a lot, all of newspapers from, let's say, the past 60, 70 years on Pakistan, and then you make it converse with that. उससे क्या, I mean, it's a very interesting thing. I don't know उससे क्या होगा. I mean, maybe we can discuss it afterwards too. Yeah, but thank you.
We are left with, I would say, last two questions now. We have a question from Miss Amber Sheikh from University of Education. What are the epistemologies we can use in mathematical physics research? Sir, you're mute. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. No, I was just saying that ये मेरी expertise से कुछ थोड़ा सा बाहर का सवाल है. So, but I think mathematics is like it was always thought of as a more the realist discipline. that where the paramount source of producing new knowledge is logic and inferences, internal inferences. Uh, but I mean, with some of these new, again, I said, new changes going on with computational mathematics, with biological mathematics, I think it opens up new questions about different strands it could take, different epistemological approaches that could be experimented with. But I may not be the best person to speak about them.
And then we have a question. Is it ethical to ask respondents in a survey about their attitude, position in ontology, epistemology? Is there any way to conduct what portion of respondents in a survey were rationalist, etc.?
ये आप रिसर्च जो है आप एकेडमिक्स के अंदर तो अगर आप सर्वे करें तो वो तो कर सकते हैं, अगर इस रूम में हम करें तो आई एम श्योर पीपल वुड हैव एन आइडिया अबाउट इट. But maybe not, it may not work on other people, because these are, these are specific, how do I put it? Theories, concept, lexicon that is peculiar to our world. So in that sense, I mean, beyond the word, our world, लोगों को शायद समझ ना आए. लेकिन हमें, जिस तरह मैंने कहा, हमें इनको बिल्कुल गहराई से समझना चाहिए. We should understand them fundamentally, and we should, understand them in a way that they don't remain disconnected from the world that is out there. चैलेंज तो यही है कि हमारा जो है ना, कि एक एकेडेमिया की दुनिया, एक असली दुनिया, इनको हम दोनों को किस तरह हम इन दोनों का ओवरलैप बढ़ा सकते हैं. That's when we are sort of, producing new knowledge. True knowledge is when the gap between them it's sort of, reduced. So yeah, I mean, I'd be interested to see. I mean, I don't know, is in this room what people would identify with, but I think people would have an opinion.
We had a question regarding the AI. Ms. Samina Gulzar from Lahore College. I think so that the question has been answered when we were talking about the AI, and that's pretty much it. We have a lot of people who are saying thank you for such a nice explanation and very informative sessions. So over to you, Dr. Ruxana, for the thank you note.
आप म्यूट पे.
Ma'am, you are on mute. We can't. She is asking me to unmute, I guess. Ruxana. Yes.
Maybe you said.
Yes. She rejoined, I guess that's why. Yeah.
Yeah, I left the session, Ameen, to see another session that's happening right now in a room about some workshop. But Ameen, I have never seen so many compliments. We have been having this session, and I think this is one of the most difficult and dense areas for, and I have attended this session by Dr. Sikandar, you, and some others over the years. And every time I hear it, I'm like, I did not know it. So you can well imagine the responses have been that it was such a difficult topic, and the expert has made it so easy. And your reviews have been excellent. You must have seen that. And so we are very thankful to you